Welcome to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. My guest on today's podcast is my long-term friend, young man who graduated from our local high school in 2017, Davis Amos. Welcome to the podcast, Davis.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Davis is recently returned from a mission in the country of Benin. He was able to serve nearly the full 2 years before COVID caused all the missionaries in his mission to leave. And so this podcast is going to be mostly Davis telling about his mission. A couple things that are unique about Davis. One thing that's maybe not unique, but just awesome. He's a scratch golfer, and that's how I first came to know him and one of his skills. But also when he graduated high school in the summer of 2017, he had 6 or more close buddies who immediately went on their mission. And Davis decided to wait a year and then left in June of 2018. And so the first part of this podcast will be just Davis sharing his story, why he didn't just go right when his buddies went, but just found his own way at his own time. And I know there's many listeners out there that often feel that there's kind of a wave of how to do things, but sometimes they don't quite feel that's them. And I have a feeling that some of the things Davis share will be helpful for you if you feel your own path in our church is just a little different and a little at your own time. And then we'll spend most of the podcast talking about a very unique mission in West Africa where the church is growing rapidly, but in its infant stage. And I'm anxious to have Davis share some of his stories. But back when I really started Twitter, when I started interacting with the high school kids, I might have even been the PTA president. My wife recruited me to be our local PTA president because no one else volunteered, and she kind of handheld me through the whole process. But I started to go to more and more sporting events, and I was looking back at my old Twitter feed, and on September 9th, 2015, I tweeted that the best high school score that I think's ever been recorded in a competitive round at our local high school, Cottonwood High School, is a 63 by Davis Amos. Do you remember that day?
Yeah, I do. I do remember that day. That was pretty fun.
What course was that at?
That was at the Ridge.
I was trying to remember what course.
Yeah, in West Valley.
Did you have any bogeys?
Yeah, I did. I bogeyed a par 5, and I had 10 birdies.
That's terrible to bogey the par 5. What is your career best round of golf, Davis?
It's that score.
And were you a senior, a junior?
I was a junior.
You were a junior?
Yeah.
And what had been your best score before that 63?
I think my best score outside of tournament golf was probably like a 68 or 69.
It's just crazy.
Yeah, so it was a big drop.
Anyway, and I looked back at the tweet today, Davis, and I was looking at the rest of the high school scores, and you were number 1 on the team. The number 2 guy, which I won't mention out loud, shot 79 that day. And that's a 60. Well, I can't do the math that quickly, but it's a big spread. And I don't know how we did that day. Do you remember how our high school team did?
Yeah, I remember.
Did we win or second or third?
There was another kid in the group in front of me who is a really good golfer. He golfed at Bingham, and he shot a 64 that day.
Crazy.
And so he was like super low, but I was just playing out of my mind, and I came in, and the guys in the group in front of me were like, "Oh, how'd you play?" I was like, "Oh, I hit it pretty well." And they're like, "Oh, what'd you fire?" I was like 63. And the kid, his face just went so red. He was like, "Are you kidding me?" Yeah, I was like, "No, I'm serious."
If you come in with a 64, you're thinking you beat everybody by 4 shots or more.
At least, totally.
That is crazy.
It was pretty funny. I think our team, there's actually Bryan High School. They're playing really well that year. And I think they beat us by a couple of strokes as a team in that tournament. But it was still fun.
It's great. Yeah. High school golf is a great sport. So let's pick up. You graduated in 2017, and you you ended up leaving for your mission a year later. Just talk to us if it's the summer of 2017 or even the spring when a lot of your buddies are putting in their papers and getting their calls. that's not what you're doing. Just kind of walk us through what your mindset was back then. And the reason we're kind of doing this segment for our listeners is just like I mentioned, some of you that just may feel your path is a little different within our church and trying to create more space for people doing this their own way on their own time.
Yeah, so this spring, I definitely had thoughts of leaving that summer with my buddies and going out on the mission, but I had a lot of thoughts the other way as well. I was playing pretty good golf. I knew that there were college golf opportunities opening up for the following year, and that was pretty attractive. That seemed pretty fun. I had a girlfriend. Recently got in a relationship, so I wasn't super antsy to jump out of that. But I think the biggest reason was maybe a lack of commitment to the Lord, and I don't think my testimony was where I wanted it to be to invite others to come unto Christ. When I was still trying to come unto Christ myself, and I don't feel like I was more immature than anybody else in my grade. I felt like maybe I knew the gospel just as well as anyone else leaving, but I definitely wanted my testimony at another level to go invite others to come into Christ. And so those were kind of what was weighing my choice.
Did you feel you let people down when you didn't go in that, what I'm going to call the initial wave of your buddies going in that summer?
I don't think so. And even if I did, I really didn't care. Because, I felt like it was my choice, my life. I'm still going to serve a mission. I don't think anyone needs to worry about when I'm going to go, So, yeah, even if anyone was let down, I really didn't care at all.
How close did you just come to saying, all my buddies are going, I don't really feel you're honest about your testimony, just saying, well, I'm just going to go anyway and just hope it all works out?
Yeah, I was pretty close. I mean, I think if golf wasn't there, I didn't have those other opportunities, I think I would have been a lot closer to the other side of choosing to go out right away. But I don't know. It's hard to say because I really wanted my testimony to be somewhere else. So it's kind of hard to say, but I think with my buddies leaving, it was kind of tough,
Why was it tough?
I was in a tight group of buddies and, hang out with them every week, every weekend, and they're all leaving. And then if you make the decision to wait a year, you won't be seeing them for 3 years instead of 2 years. So it's a good amount of time. But praying about it and, searching for a little bit of personal revelation, I felt it was best for me to wait a year and to kind of to prep a little bit more for my mission.
Were you worried that a year would make you further away from serving a mission as you got used to college golf life and a girlfriend and your buddies were all gone? Or talk to us about that.
I don't think I was worried about that. I was definitely set on going on a mission. I think it was just a matter of when. I wasn't worried about, if I play out of my mind my first year of golf, I still would have gone, and I played all right, but I don't think any of those things would have affected my choice of going out on a mission. I think it was just a matter of when.
I liked your honesty, Davis, where you said, if I'm going to invite people to Christ and into our church, I've got to be in a spot where I'm comfortable doing that.
Right.
There's a lot of honest integrity in that statement that I really respect.
Thanks.
Talk about what happened between the spring of 2017 where you just felt, I'm not going to go in this wave with my buddies. And I assume you got your call roughly in the spring of 2018. Talk to us about that year.
Yeah. I remember having a conversation with my dad, kind of in that winter and spring of senior year of high school, and he kind of just sat me down and he kind of encouraged me to get more serious about my choices, about the gospel, what I want to do in life, because it's soon to become a reality, and it's better to be prepared than to just sit back and think everything's going to be chosen for you. And so that's kind of a turning point. It kind of pushed me to want to know for myself what I want to do, to make my own choices, and to kind of push myself a little to find that testimony, find that piece that will kind of push me towards making a final decision. And so, yeah, I'm kind of locked in my choice maybe mid-spring that I was going to wait a year. And I think everyone that I cared about kind of just accepted it. I don't think it was too tough for anyone to handle. I think everyone just kind of respects your choice. And so that year went well. Went to college, played golf. It was all fun. It went well. I started building my testimony, focusing more on reading the Book of Mormon, getting a real testimony than just turning the pages and saying, oh yeah, I've read it. But, saying, yeah, I've read it and I have a testimony that's the truth. And so I think that year was definitely big for me, preparing to go a year later than some of my buddies.
Talk about advice for us parents. Us parents sometimes want our kids to make certain choices, and it's always a balance versus, kind of, helping our kids make the choices we think that are best for them versus sort of sitting back and kind of letting them find their own way. And it sounds like you had a couple of conversations, one or maybe more with your parents where there was some, and I think you mentioned this in your farewell, now that I'm remembering this, just the role of your dad. And you come from a great family, great parents, but just talk about the balance there.
Yeah, I think, every parent wants their kid to, do the right thing. And I think the way that you help them make that decision or make that a reality is definitely by helping them out, talking to them, having serious conversations, loving them. But in the end, it's the kid's decision on what he or she wants to do. So, you got to set the example and you got to talk to them, explain to them, what you're feeling. But in the end, it's their own choice. Each of us, we have the ability to choose exactly what we want. And that's one of the greatest gifts we have from God. So, it's really the choice of the kid that's going out. But I think the parents have a huge influence, but you got to have, the serious conversations. You got to love them. You got to be understanding as well. So I think it's a mix of all of that.
Yeah, it's a good answer. I'm still learning how to do that as a parent, and it sounds like you've got great parents that navigated that pretty well and gave you space, but also at times appropriate encouragement. But I felt as a parent, those moments kind of have to come at the right time. And if I sort of make the constant narrative about a certain outcome for my kid, and they kind of know whenever I'm around, that I'm thinking about something and we're going to have that conversation again, I find that's when I potentially drive a wedge between me and my kid versus having a relationship you're talking about based on love. And then at times, that trust or that love allows for a helpful conversation. Any more thoughts about your parents' role in your life to prepare you for a mission, especially that last year or two?
Yeah, totally. I think growing up in the church, my beliefs, my testimony was totally based off of my parents, which is totally strong. But then you reach a point where you got to start making your own choices, and leaving home, going away for 2 years off of your parents' testimony just isn't really going to work. And you grow up in the church, you feel the Spirit here and there, you hear some amazing talks, and they're all signs of the truth. But you gotta get to a point where you're making your own decisions and you're choosing what's best for yourself. But my parents have been awesome. Like they've totally been a good base for me in the church. Just leading by example. Not telling me I need to go do this and this, and not acting upon it themselves. Like they definitely lead by example, and it's easy to follow someone that leads by example than someone that just is telling you what to do. So I think that was definitely big.
Talk about your testimony. It got to the point where you felt like you could go, and you've referenced the Book of Mormon as kind of the anchor or the cornerstone of your testimony. Is that true? Talk about the role of the Book of Mormon in getting your testimony to a point for all you could serve.
Yeah, I think when I kind of made that decision that I was gonna wait a year and go the following year, I kind of made it a personal goal that I'm gonna read the Book of Mormon again, but I'm gonna really focus on reading it and understanding it and searching for the truth in it. I think growing up and throughout high school, when I've read the Book of Mormon, it's just kind of, turn the pages, seminary, I got to read this, get through it. But I don't think I was really reading it sincerely. So I made it a goal for myself to, get serious about it and read it sincerely. And I did that, and it definitely helped a lot. It was a good base. And I felt good going out after I'd done that, because I completed a small goal that was important to me. I'd gained a testimony of the Book of Mormon. Maybe I don't have it. I don't know the Book of Mormon as well as some people do, but just the fact that I accomplished like a small goal like that was a good stepping stone for me. So yeah, I think that was.
Was that a suggestion that you received to sort of focus on the Book of Mormon, and was that something you just personally felt, this will be helpful for me to get my testimony where it needs to be?
No, that was just a personal thing, just a personal goal. Nobody had really suggested that. I mean, everyone says, read the scriptures, say your prayers, all of that, but this was something kind of specific that I wanted to do for myself, my own testimony.
I love that. And I think testimonies come different ways to different people, but I certainly believe in the Book of Mormon and its role to convince people that Jesus is the Christ and the church has been restored.
Right.
Talk about the day you opened your mission call. Did you do that alone? Did you do that with a family? Did you do both?
Yeah. I remember my mission call came in the mail while
that eventually is going to date you as old someday when like you're 80 and your grandchildren hear that. I don't know how they'll come, but go ahead.
I totally agree. Yeah, I was in Las Vegas at a golf tournament with the team.
How appropriate.
And it came in the mail here, and I got a text from my dad with a picture of it, and he's like, "Oh, it's here." And I was like, "Oh man, like what do I do? Do I have him send me a picture of it and I read it off from here? Like, can I wait a few days until I get home?" But I ended up waiting a couple of days until I come home. And then I had my family over, my grandparents, my girlfriend, and I opened it, read it. Actually, before that, just kind of to cool myself down, I remember going into my room, kneeling down, saying a prayer, reading my patriarchal blessing, and when I did that, I just started getting super emotional, and I think it kind of prepared me for what I was about to do. I opened it up and I read it, and I read Benin and Togo. I totally botched the name. I think I read like Benin Kotanu or something. I had no idea where it was, and that was pretty wild. I kept reading, and then I read Ghana MTC. I knew Ghana was in Africa somewhere, and then I said French speaking. So it was kind of a shock. I wasn't really expecting that. But I mean it was definitely cool once I figured out where it was, West Africa. I'm speaking French. Like, a lot of people kind of dream for that call. It's kind of a wild, third world call, and I was pretty excited.
Talk about your first, I don't know how many weeks in the MTC. Talk about the Ghana MTC and that experience.
Yeah, so I was in the Ghana MTC for 6 weeks, and the first 3 weeks were totally tough for me. The MTC itself is pretty nice. It's not too bad, but there was definitely the culture shock. You're not in America anymore. You're in West Africa. With a lot of West Africans, people from all over Africa, different cultural ideas and differences, and the food was so tough that it just was not any good, and it was kind of a grind. I remember feeling kind of homesick a little bit, like, do I really want to do this? But the thought of not getting to Benin and seeing what it was like, you got to get through this. Like, you got to go, you got to get to your mission. So it was different. It was tough, language study. I was learning French from a Ghanaian who had gone to a French speaking mission, and she definitely helped us a lot. But there's only so much French you can learn in 6 weeks. So I mean, it was tricky, just the mix of trying to learn the French language, trying to get used to the culture, trying to get used to the food, trying to forget about home. It was a lot to take in. But you just kind of push through it. I remember crying on the toilet a few nights, like, oh, what have I got myself into? Like,
it's honest.
But you just kind of push through it. You pray, you try and get close to the Lord, get the real connection, and after 6 weeks, I found myself out of there, and I was in Benin, and that was.
Is that an airline flight or?
Yeah, so it's like an hour flight from Accra, Ghana to Benin, Cotonou. Yeah.
And tell us, just start to share stories from your mission that are highlights for you, and that would be helpful for our listeners.
Yeah. There's a lot of stories, but I think there was really a turning point in my mission when I think I was about halfway through my mission. I was in Togo, so there's 2 countries in the mission. There's Benin and there's Togo, and they're neighboring each other. And I was in Togo. I was maybe like 10 months out, and there was this girl that worked with us. Her name's God Power. She has a cool name.
Cool name.
Yeah. And she's 14 years old, and she would work with us a lot. She would translate into the local language, Ewe. because we taught in French, and a lot of the people wouldn't speak French. They'd only speak Eve. A lot of kind of older mothers that didn't really receive education, but were still interested in the gospel. So we would take God power, and we teach in French to her, and she'd translate into Eve, and it was a lot of fun. We got a lot of good work done, and I remember she was on my camera, and she was going through photos that I had taken, and she came across a photo of our little room in our apartment, and in this photo you saw our beds with our mosquito nets on them, and you saw our fans that were in the room. And at this point in my mission, I was just kind of I was a complainer. I was like, oh man, like 10 months in West Africa, I'm sleeping in a mosquito net, I have a fan, no AC, it's so hot every night, don't get any sleep. Like, man, I gotta do another year of this or whatever. And God Power said something that definitely kind of changed my perspective. When she saw this photo, she said, oh wow, like you guys have mosquito nets and fans. Like, I don't have either of those. And I was like, oh man, like what am I complaining about? Like, I have it so good compared to these people. And so that was kind of a turning point for me. I kind of changed my perspective on things. I tried not to complain as much, because we had it so good compared to what the people were living in. A lot of them don't have mosquito nets. They're getting malaria a lot. Most of them don't have fans. A fan will just keep you somewhat cool so you can sleep through the night. And God Power, she didn't have either of those, but she wasn't complaining. She was just going through life, helping the missionaries, translating for us. And so that was definitely a big turning point for me.
It's cool. What a great story. What a great name.
Yeah.
Can you share more stories?
Maybe I can share maybe a little bit of a wilder story. So in Benin, you use buses to get around, and it'll be just maybe a 12-person bus. And what they'll do is they'll fit 25 or 30 people into this 12-person bus. And if you're kind of in the outskirts, that like outlying villages, there's one big road that it goes through Benin, one cement road. And so these buses will kind of just go on a loop, taking people in and out of the city. And so they'll fill up these buses. And there was one time we took the bus into the city, and we went around the market. I think we got some vegetables or whatever. And when we went to catch a bus to go out, one thing you need to know is on these buses, there's bus boys. And they kind of open the door. They collect the money from everyone getting on and off the bus. And the buses are really more like large vans. And it gets pretty intense down in the city because there's so many buses rolling in and out, and everyone's trying to get their business, get people on and off. And when the bus boys see a white guy, they're like, oh man, we gotta get this guy, because they charge us more than they charge everyone else. It's totally racist, but that they make money off of us and we can't do anything about it. And so there's one time, me and my companion, we hopped onto a bus that this guy was leading us to. And one of the other bus boys, he got so mad that we got onto their bus and not his bus. And so he pulled out a knife and he stabbed the tire of the other bus. And so he wouldn't let anybody go. And so he's like, you guys are getting onto our bus. And so he takes us over to his bus, and we go back to where we're supposed to go. But it's kind of just
It's
funny
crazy.
how,
That's awesome.
everyone wants the white guy to get onto their bus so they can take his money.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other stories you'd like to share with our listeners? I love that story. It's just real life mission story.
Yeah. So, and one of the people that kind of definitely touched me the most, her name's Janet, and she lives in Togo as well, and she's 15 years old, and she works coal. So in Benin and Togo and in West Africa, they don't have gas ovens, but they use coal. They light a fire to cook their food. And so coal is a big product they use to cook their food, and you buy every day to prepare. And so they'll do coal mining up in the north of Benin and Togo. They'll bring the coal down, and then they'll have someone just divide it and sell it. And so Jeanette, she's someone that is down in the city, and she divides the coal into piles and then sells it to just the locals. And I had worked in this area maybe 7 months into my mission, and I'd kind of created a relationship with Jeanette. We taught her a little bit, and she was so fun to be around. But she was really like a child slave. She was adopted into this family in the city, and her family lived out in the village, and she worked for this family, and everything she made went to her adopted family, and she didn't gain anything. And it was really terrible to watch, and it was really tough. And she didn't speak any French. She's originally from Nigeria, and so she spoke English, but she also spoke their local language, Ewe. And so it was kind of fun. She was one of the first people I taught on my mission in English.
Wow.
And that I was maybe 7 months in, so it was fun to actually use English and get away from the French for a little bit. But it was really tough to see her go through such a terrible situation. But on top of everything, she was just so happy, and I never saw her like sad or put down. And she probably had the worst circumstances of anybody. She's a child slave. She worked, her hours were 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day, 7 days a week. And, that's just a joke, but she was always smiling. She chose to be happy. And so that was kind of a point in my mission, where I kind of told myself, like, if she can be happy, why can't I? I got it so good. And so that was kind of a point where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna choose to be happy like Jeanette is. And so I left that area, and about a year later, I came back and served in the same area.
Wow.
And Jeanette was still there working coal, and we got to work with her. And she was never able to come to church because her adopted mom wouldn't let her leave on Sunday. And that was tough because she wanted to be baptized. But I know that'll come around. But she was like a missionary too. She brought all of her friends, and we taught them, and her friends ended up getting baptized. So Jeanette she was awesome, and she was so happy, even though she had a difficult situation.
That's a great story. What a great woman.
Yeah.
Other awesome stories. I love these stories, Davis.
Yeah, there we had another friend. This was back in Benin near the end of my mission, and his name's Atanas. And Atanas is definitely unique because he only has one leg, and um, he is a single man. He has no family. He's not married. He has no kids, and he lives alone in kind of a little shack. And in 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 Benin and Togo, people who are disabled like that will kind of just give up and beg for money. I mean, which is it's hard to blame those people because it's so tough. But even though Atanas was disabled, he only had one leg. He never complained. He worked every day to provide for himself, and he like Jeanette, he chose to be happy, even though he had the worst of circumstances. He had one leg. He'd hobble around on crutches, but he'd go work out in the fields. He'd cut grass with a machete, and he loved life. He loved talking to us about life. He loved the gospel, um, and he ended up getting baptized. And it's cool to find these people that have the worst situation ever, but they're not complaining and they're not moaning and groaning about how tough their situation is, but they're choosing to be happy. And I think that's totally one of the biggest things I learned on my mission was, all of us have the choice. Before my mission, I had the choice. Do I want to stay a year? Do I want to go now? We're all blessed with a choice, the the ability to choose. God gave us this gift, and the people I met in West Africa and Benin and Togo, they use their choice wisely. They choose to be happy, even though their circumstances are terrible. They could choose to be sad. I think about how good we have it here, and how many of us are just choosing to be sad and choosing to be not choosing happiness. Where we got the best of circumstances. We have life so good here. But that's another thing I learned from Atanas.
Love that story. And you may have some more, but I'm going to ask you some questions now. Yeah. If, I'm here in Salt Lake City and have never been to West Africa, if you just wanted to, and you've done this with the stories you've told, just help me understand the saints in Benin and Togo. Just teach me about, introduce them to me. And you've done this in these stories, but just help me to understand their hearts.
Yeah. They're totally a fun, happy, loving people, and they're a lot of fun to be around. They'll talk your ear off for forever. They're so talkative, and they love Jesus Christ. Even just the people in general. I mean, there's a lot of Muslims in Benin. Tons of people practice voodoo, but there's a lot of Christians who love Jesus Christ, and the people that convert to the Church of Jesus Christ, they love it. They found the truth. There's so many churches in West Africa, so many Christian churches, so many pastors and prophets and all of that, people looking for money, using the gospel to make money. And so now that they found the truth, they're just loving it up. They look forward to Sunday, going to church, studying the gospel, and, they're so fun to be around. They love the hymns. They love singing the hymns. Whenever we'll go over to a member's house, they're like, oh, let's sing a hymn or something. And so it's fun to be around. And as opposed to sometimes I think here we look at, oh, Sunday, gotta go to church, where there it's like Sunday we get to go to church, and they just love Jesus Christ. It's pretty fun.
Tell our listeners, is the church growing there fast, slow? Give us an idea of how the church is growing there. My impression generally in West Africa is the church is growing very fast.
Yeah, the church is growing really fast in West Africa, in Benin and Togo. It's definitely growing fast. I think it's just a matter of, making sure everyone's ready for the gospel before they get baptized. A lot of people are willing to jump in the water and be baptized, but, you want them to have a solid testimony before they make such an important decision. Because, if you let people get baptized off the bat like that, they can go inactive pretty fast because they don't really know what they're getting into. But when you really help them build a real testimony of the truthfulness of the gospel, they're definitely ready for it, and they stay active. So yeah, it's definitely growing fast.
Tell our listeners, I know when I went on my mission to England, it stretched me in ways that I've never been stretched before. And often when that happens to ourselves, we learn things about us that we've never known before. Tell her, are there things you learned about you, Elder Amos, that you're glad you learned about yourselves in this really stretching situation?
Yeah. I think, it gets tough. You get beat up out there sometimes, mentally and emotionally. But I think everybody does, even the best of the best. I kind of think back to the Book of Mormon, to Nephi, and Nephi. You kind of think, there's no worries. He's got it all under wraps. He's the one that says, I'll go, I'll do. You think he has no imperfections. But in 2 Nephi chapter 4, Nephi, he kind of opens up to us, and he kind of tells us, he kind of shows some of his imperfections, and he talks about how, Satan's getting on his nerves. He's having a tough time. He's a sinner. But there's a statement in the middle of the chapter. He says, nevertheless, I know in whom I've trusted. And I love that, because, Nephi, you think he has no problems. He's tough. He's got everything under wraps. But, he has imperfections too. He has difficulties. But if we can say, nevertheless, I know in whom I've trusted, that'll give us the confidence to keep moving forward and to stay on the right path. And so Nephi is a big example to me, to just, stay in it, stay tough. Yes, you're imperfect, and so is everyone else. So am I. And, you don't have to worry about being perfect, but, trust the Lord and follow Christ. And so, you have tough times, you have emotional difficulties, but once you kind of try and take the load off of your back and put it onto the Lord's back, he'll get you through it. And so that kind of helped me a lot.
I love that. That's some of my favorite. I kind of have a Book of Mormon heroes, and Moroni and Nephi are my two Book of Mormon heroes.
Totally.
And I love him being vulnerable and honest in that scripture you referenced. It just made me like him more. It didn't decrease his prophetic ministry or his work, but it somehow increased it in my eyes.
Totally.
Other things you learned about you as you were stretched, or other stories you'd like to share?
Yeah. Um, I remember, I remember a missionary that was pretty influential in my mission. Um, he gave this lesson that was just totally stellar about personal revelation. And it totally was a game changer for me. And, I can't remember everything that was said, but one thing he talked a lot about um, were just the ways to receive personal revelation. And one of the biggest ways for him was thoughts that came to his head after he prayed. And he chose to write them down in a prayer journal. And this was kind of an invitation from the prophet a few months earlier of writing down your thoughts when you're looking for revelation. And so after he gave this killer lesson, I kind of said to myself, all right, like I'd like to learn how to receive revelation as well. And I think a lot of the time when we look for revelation, maybe we think of something big that'll happen, something dramatic, a huge life change, maybe a big dream or something like that. But for me personally, and I think for a lot of people, that doesn't happen. Definitely with my testimony, it was never like that. It was never a huge change or a big situation that changed everything, but I think it's the little things. And so when I focused on using this prayer journal, writing my thoughts after I prayed, I started to receive a lot of like real revelation and real things that were helping me in my life. And so I would say prayers, I would ask questions, I'd have a conversation with the Lord, and I would ask him to send thoughts my way that would answer questions and that would help me in my life as a missionary, just as a normal person with my own difficulties. And it's crazy like how it works. I'll say prayers, I'll ask questions, and once I get off my knees, all sorts of thoughts will start flowing into my head, answers to my questions, and ideas about how I can improve personally. And so I write that down. I set some goals in that journal, and then you kind of reanalyze the next day. How did I improve on this aspect from yesterday to today? And so I think that was a huge step for me when I really got more serious about receiving personal revelation. Not to just look for the big change, not to just say, oh, I know the church is true, I know the Book of Mormon's true, and kind of go through the motions, but kind of maybe get out of your comfort zone a little bit and really push yourself to find the truth. So that helped me a lot.
I love that, Davis, and I've noticed a shift in the church with the church support or home-centered church supported. I think part of that is helping members to not just always, sometimes answers come in church talks or a discussion at Sunday school or a speaker at sacrament meetings. I don't want to sort of discount that, but often because there's so much support around us as Latter-day Saints, especially in the areas where the church is mature and we have wonderful leaders, that sometimes we kind of delegate all our answers to hearing it through those sources. And sometimes we don't develop the skills you're talking about, which is really getting and developing personal revelation and the tools to do that you just went through. And often then those questions may be answered, outside of just feelings that come to our mind. But I think it's kind of a holier way or a more sustainable way or more spiritually mature way is is everything around us is a means to help us get very good personal revelation for ourselves.
Totally.
And it's unique to each of us.
Yeah.
So I love that. Other things you'd like to share about what you learned about yourself? I love this segment on personal revelation. That is so scalable and so important for every, Latter-day Saint and everybody on the earth to understand that. And I love that it takes a little time to learn how to do that. I've learned, for me, my formula for personal revelation is getting up in the morning, reading and praying, and then I leave the house and I go for a long walk. And most of the time, and sometimes I'll pull out my phone and write notes on my phone. I have to bring my glasses now on my walk to do that. And I don't want to just say that's the exclusive form. Sometimes I'll feel it in the temple or in a podcast when I'm learning from somebody.
Totally.
But I've learned that, that's kind of my formula to just have God open the communication channel to me. And in fact, reaching out to you to do this podcast was an impression that came a couple times, just that you would have some content here that would be helpful for some of our listeners, and that's true.
Cool.
Other thoughts, other stories you want to tell from your mission or things that you learned?
Yeah. Just kind of bouncing back to what you said. Revelation, I don't think it ever comes from one specific way. I think, it can come out of nowhere. It can come through somebody else. Maybe something that you say is going to touch me, or it's going to touch somebody else, and now God is using you to speak to this person. Maybe that can come in a dream. In West Africa, they dream a lot, and they have real answers to prayers and dreams. Me personally, I don't, and so I kind of had to find that elsewhere, kind of more of a base to receive answers to my questions. Maybe that can come in reading the scriptures in the Book of Mormon, in the Bible. Maybe that can come at church. Will give a talk that will totally touch you. So I don't think we need to look for a huge response to questions or a huge change in our lives, but these little things that come and go, that's revelation. And when you feel it, when you feel it in your heart, it's there. So going back to the mission and to just ideas, changes, I think just one thing that I learned on my mission is anything's possible. I think looking back in the MTC, when I was like, man, what am I got myself into? When I got to the mission field, I remember having those same thoughts. I was working with my trainer. He was from Congo, and he didn't speak any English. He spoke only French, and I didn't speak any French. And so that was tough. It's
tough.
I was thinking, man, am I really going to get through this? But, when you push yourself, when you search for a connection with the Lord, anything's possible. And we read that in the scriptures over and over, anything's possible with the help of Christ. And it's totally true. It's tough to do it on your own, but when you're really looking for that connection with the Lord, you can get through anything. So
I love that. I've loved a couple talks. I've loved Elder Bednar's sort of talk about personal revelation, and you're teaching the same thing, where he talks about the light switch, where sometimes we get a very dramatic answer, but how that's the exception.
Mm-hmm.
Culturally, we sometimes talk about that a lot. And I think it can create a feeling in people's minds that that's the experience I should have to know an answer, is the light switch experience. But I've found that most of my revelation comes through pretty gradual line upon line. And back when I was running marathons, often I'd start when it was completely dark in a 3-hour training run. And on a cloudy day, after a couple hours, it would be completely light. But on a cloudy day, I couldn't even tell when the sun came up. I couldn't tell, it was such a gradual, but I knew it was light and I knew the sun was up. And that just sort of represented for me that answer you're talking about in your heart. I knew it was light. I didn't quite know exactly when it turned light. I didn't actually be able to look back when I got an answer sometimes and pinpoint where exactly when the answer. Now, running on a day when there's no clouds and you can see the sun actually come up over the peak, you kind of know. And so I've had experiences. I probably have had some light switch experiences, but I've had a lot of those sort of experiences where it's daylight, and I haven't quite known exactly when. But I know in my heart an answer, and I know how to move forward. So that's kind of my favorite talk about personal revelation. One of the things maybe in his talk is, and I think this is really true for young people that are trying to figure out their path, is often there's a segment of young people, especially returned missionaries, who know exactly what they're going to do for the rest of their life, and they just do it. But like that's the exception, and there's 90% of us that all we usually know in our 20s is just kind of a feeling.
Right.
And I think you were looking for a career in business management, and there's enough fog lifted, you kind of know the next couple steps, and you take those, and then you kind of know the next couple of steps. And that's the way I've seen careers work out, is just people that kind of have a feeling where they should go and proactively take a step and not be paralyzed because they can't see 20 steps down the road and exactly how this is going to work out. And that's true with your story of serving a mission and getting the MTC and getting to Benin and sort of going, oh my gosh, what have I got myself into? And now you're on the other side of a mission with the full context and the fog completely lifted of what you accomplished and what you learned about yourself. Yeah. So I love your focus on personal revelation. We're kind of coming to the end. I'm going to share a story, and then I'm going to turn it back to you, see if you've got some more stories. And I may invite you to share your testimony in French.
Okay.
Well, that would, since we're talking about Cottonwood High School in Salt Lake City in West Africa, I'm reminded of a family story that I'm not sure I've shared on the podcast for our listeners, but my brother Dave and his wife served as mission presidents in Sierra Leone, which is, I don't know if that's a neighboring country or just in the area.
It's not too far away. It's just further down the coast of West Africa.
And in about 2012, our son Ben, who is a friend of Davis, looks up to Davis, a fellow golfer, was playing junior high football and had a uniform that said Osler on the back and Cottonwood Colts on the front. And he grew out of that uniform and he quit playing football, and he actually went and played his senior year, which is another story. But he donated that football jersey to the Desert Industries. And in the most amazing story that our family's ever happened is my brother and his wife and their two assistants were in a car going on a back road around Freetown, Sierra Leone, and came across a young man wearing a jersey that said Osler on the back.
That's so cool.
And they stopped him, and he spoke the local dialect, and the assistants were there that knew the local dialect. And at first they thought he was being accused of stealing the uniform, and he didn't even want his picture taken, but the assistants who spoke the language explained to him they didn't think he stole it. And it was just this incredible tender mercy, especially for my sister-in-law, Rochelle, that God knew her, and that this football jersey from Salt Lake City, Utah, made it not even to the downtown Freetown, but this little back road. And if you Google Ben Osler jersey, you'll find stories in the local newspaper here in Salt Lake, as it became a story that made the local news here. But God knows us, and sometimes we get a really tender mercy that's pretty dramatic like that. But lots of times we just get that feeling in our heart we're doing the right thing. And it's almost as powerful as something like that, but because we know in our own heart the personal revelation we're receiving. So we have a soft spot for that part of the world. Their mission ended early because of Ebola.
Oh, wow.
And so they had all their missionaries leave in a very short time frame, and their mission was shut down until they could solve Ebola, which did happen. And so they're very empathetic, obviously, to what's going on with missionaries leaving their mission early and missions being shut down, and because they lived that within their mission. Back to you, though, Davis. Any other stories you'd like to share for our listeners?
Yeah, I think just to wrap it up, just what we can take away is we all have a choice, and we can choose to be down on ourselves or down on other people, or we can choose to be happy and choose happiness. And God, he's given us this wonderful ability to choose for ourselves. And sometimes it's tricky, sometimes it's tough to choose happiness. But even those in the most difficult situations in the slums of West Africa, they figured out the way to choose happiness. And so if we can kind of push ourselves to take control of the situation, Satan, he wants us to be unhappy. He wants us to be down and dreary. But if we can take control of the situation and use our own free agency to choose, we will definitely be on top. So I think that's one of the biggest takeaways.
Love that. And I'd love you to share your testimony. I don't think we've ever invited anybody to share their testimony in the language from their mission.
Ok, bon. Je sais que Dieu, il nous aime beaucoup. C'est pourquoi il a envoyé son Fils Jésus-Christ sur la terre de faire un sacrifice pour nous. Et je sais que Dieu nous aime beaucoup parce que il nous a donné une famille. Et la famille est réellement une grande bénédiction pour nous. Et quand nous avons la confiance dans nos parents et en nos familles, nous pouvons accomplir les grandes choses dans ces vies. Et je sais que Joseph Smith, il est réellement un prophète de Dieu et il était appelé par Dieu de faire une grande œuvre sur cette terre. Et je sais que quand nous prions à Dieu, il nous donne réellement les réponses de nos questions. Mais on doit faire un peu d'effort en notre part, et Dieu il va faire son effort. Et je sais que chaque fois que on parle avec Dieu, et il donne les réponses. Et je témoigne que toutes ces choses sont vraies. Au nom de Jésus-Christ. Amen.
Amen. Great Spirit. I miss those testimonies in church. We're not doing church. So that's a personal treat for me to hear the spirit of you speaking French and bearing testimony to church. Thank you, Davis. I sure appreciate your parents, Jeff and Annette, for raising great young men in you and all your siblings and their service to our community, to our church. And thank you, Davis, for being on the podcast. Thanks for your service.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
To help people come into Christ. Glad to have you here. And my only challenge for you is someday I want you to text me and say, I beat my career 63. You can't have your career round be as a junior. So even though you set the bar very, very high or low, it's a low score, a high bar. Someday I hope you're able to break that score, and maybe it'll be in another competitive tournament. And maybe the difference in that round is you won't bogey a par 5.
Yeah,
you'll birdie that par 5, and it'll be the difference.
Totally.
So you have a great life ahead of you, Davis. Thanks for your testimony and your service. And thank you, our listeners, for joining us on another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler.